Hey, welcome back to another dispatch from Holly and McKay. Today we're going to talk about myths, and in particular, a myth that comes around every time there is a major sporting event, and the Super Bowl is coming. And so the myth is that big events like this are linked to human trafficking. Holly, where does this stuff come from?
Well, I first remember sort of hearing about this link, gosh, it would have been back in about 2009 during my very early Fox days. And I was pitched a story about how the Super Bowl was sort of the biggest human trafficking event in the world. And there was a lot of law enforcement who were talking about it. And then, of course, it sort of spreads like wildfire in the media. But it always sort of concerned me because I never felt that there was any real data to prove this claim. And it's always really hard to take aim at anything to do with human trafficking because it is such a problem in the United States and it's such an abhorrent thing. But I think it's also important when we are dealing with this topic is to make sure that the facts are straight. And if we are going to take it seriously, we have to make sure that the headlines out there are accurate. And this has always been something with this particular claim that I could just never put my finger on. So I decided to do a little bit of research. The topic sort of came up again in another conversation with a friend over lunch a couple of weeks ago. And I thought I wanted to do a little bit more digging on this to find out is there any actual data or are these news stories pretty much just sort of anecdotal? And often what happens when the Super Bowl comes to whatever city, law enforcement are the ones that start sort of talking about this and sort of perpetuating this idea. And they get a lot more money is thrown at it, so they get a lot more resources. But often I found that what happens is because there is a much more sort of attention on it, there may be an uptick in arrests. But oftentimes, when you actually dig into the data, those arrests are more to do with prostitution than they are with human trafficking. And again, this is very murky because these two different issues can be conflated, but oftentimes they are separate issues. And so you have a lot of sex right groups that also come out and complain and sort of say a lot of people are put behind bars doing something of their own volition. And I do, again, think it's very important that we don't lump those two things into the same category because I don't think that helps the true victims of human trafficking.
Hmm. Well, okay. So there is a phenomenon in news where you get what's called the original story, and the original story may or may not be factual, but it's a popular story because it gets readership. And the phenomenon in the news media is that this story tends to take on a life of its own and turns into repetitions, and over long periods of time that repetition becomes something that becomes kind of a necessary mention whenever a particular subject comes up. Do you see that this is one of those phenomenon that is occurring, that the news media basically is reflexively repeating something for which there may be no basis?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is what we've been really seeing, I think, over the past 12 years, really. It's been, you can sort of trace some of the origins of this myth, if you want to call it, back to the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens. And that was sort of the first time that sporting event was linked with sort of a surge in sex trafficking. And then ever since then, it sort of has come back, and each year we see it repeated. The Super Bowl is in Phoenix this year, and again, Phoenix law enforcement is sort of repeating it, but again, it's not without sort of any hard data. And again, hard data is very hard to come by when it comes to trafficking. But I do again think it's so important for the media to not just take somebody's specific word for it, but to actually look at the facts and how victims can be helped. And it doesn't help to sort of put a huge amount of attention once a year on a big event and say this is what's happening, and then really it fades after that. And I can guarantee those very unscrupulous traffickers, they're waking up Monday morning after the Super Bowl and they're doing exactly the same thing that they're doing. And so the argument really is these resources, instead of piling it in for a few weeks over game day, they should be spread throughout the year. This is something that we should have our eye on 365 days of the year, not just when a Super Bowl comes to a certain city. Even trafficking sort of anti-trafficking organizations themselves have come out and spoken about this and said there's nothing to prove it, and it can do more harm than good. For example, the Anti-Trafficking Review found that 76% of US print media from 2010 to 2016 propagated the particular narrative, but had zero empirical support. And so the researchers for that really found that stories were kind of bolstered and founded just simply by citing authoritarian sources such as police or politicians or anti-trafficking advocates. And there was no verifiable research or disseminated facts and figures, and there was no citation. So basically, they also agreed that it was very much conflating trafficking and prostitution.
Yeah. Well, so you know what I really find interesting about this particular interview with you is this um, diligence that you are basically advocating for in the media. And this is just one example of cases where this kind of thing happens. It happens all the time, all over the place. But the fact that you're speaking out for diligence in the media, I think, is actually quite an admirable thing that shows to people just how professional of a journalist you actually are in terms of getting the facts straight and paying attention to fundamentals. And it's admirable, Hollie. And so thank you for taking the time to explain some of this for people to get to know a little bit better. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely, thank you. And again, just as a final note, the attention often fades on this particular issue once those stadium lights go out. And the negative consequence of that is that the victimization doesn't decrease once the game is over, it continues. So these things need to move beyond a hype of a one particular event and be looked at every single day of the year.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up to that. I mean, so like for those kinds of things, do you believe that a different narrative needs to be established that has the objective of maintaining visibility on the actual facts of the problem that is going on?
It just needs to be an honest narrative. We can't base our facts on facts that don't exist. And I don't think that does justice to the people that need help.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, Hollie. Again, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.